My name is Scarlett Hayes. I'm 29, and 3 years ago, my parents didn't even bother showing up to my wedding. They claimed they were too busy with my golden child brother's latest startup venture. But last month, when I pulled into their driveway in my brand new $135, 000 Porsche 911 Turbo, suddenly their phones started working again. Suddenly, they remembered they had a daughter. What they didn't know was that this car wasn't just a symbol of my success. It was the beginning of the most satisfying revenge I'd ever orchestrated against the family that abandoned me when I needed them most. Hey, everyone. Before we dive into this wild family drama, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a story about family betrayal, sweet revenge, and the most satisfying karma payback you've ever heard, smash that like button and subscribe, because this gets absolutely insane. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. Growing up in the Hayes household was like living in a constant audition where I never got the part. My brother Marcus, 2 years older, was the sun around which our entire family orbited. Everything he touched turned to gold in my parents' eyes, while everything I achieved somehow got overlooked or minimized. Marcus was the quarterback, the valedictorian, the one who got into Harvard Business School. I was the daughter who did okay, despite graduating summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in computer science. When Marcus started his first tech company at 22, our parents mortgaged their house to give him $200 0 inches startup capital. When I landed my first job at a Fortune 500 company with a starting salary higher than most people's dream jobs, Dad's response was, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Marcus got featured in TechCrunch?" The pattern was so consistent it became predictable. Christmas mornings were Marcus showcases. Birthday dinners became Marcus networking opportunities. Even my high school graduation party somehow turned into a celebration of Marcus getting accepted to Harvard. I learned early that love in the Hayes family was conditional, and apparently I never met the conditions. But I kept trying. God, how I kept trying. I thought maybe if I worked harder, achieved more, made more money, they'd finally see me. I thought maybe if I became successful enough, they'd realize they had 2 children worth being proud of. I was naive enough to believe that blood meant something, that family meant something, that surely when it came to the biggest day of my life, they'd show up. I met David during my second year at my tech job. He was a software architect, brilliant and kind, with this way of seeing me that my family never had. When he looked at me, I wasn't the lesser Hayes child or the daughter who couldn't quite measure up. I was just Scarlett, and somehow that was enough. We dated for 3 years, and when he proposed in our favorite coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning, I cried tears I didn't even know I had been holding back. Planning our wedding should have been the happiest time of my life. David's family embraced me immediately, treating me like the daughter they'd always wanted. His mom spent hours with me looking at venues. His dad walked me through the family traditions they wanted to share. For the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be genuinely wanted and celebrated. My parents' response to our engagement was lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," Mom said when I called to tell them, but I could hear the TV in the background and knew I didn't have her full attention. Dad mumbled something about hoping David had a good job. When I asked if they wanted to meet him, they said they were too busy with Marcus's latest venture, some cryptocurrency startup that was apparently going to revolutionize everything. I sent them save the dates 8 months in advance. I called to ask about dietary restrictions for the venue. I even offered to pay for their flights since we were having the wedding in David's hometown in Colorado, 3 hours from where they lived. Every conversation felt like pulling teeth, but I persisted because surely they wouldn't miss their daughter's wedding. The final guest count was due to the venue 6 weeks before the wedding. When I called to confirm their attendance, Mom sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "Well, Marcus is launching his app that same weekend, and you know how important this is for his future. Your father and I really need to be there for the investor presentations." "Mom," I said, my voice smaller than I intended, "it's my wedding. I know, sweetheart, but you understand, right? This could make or break Marcus's entire career. You're already established, you'll be fine. Maybe we can take you and David out for dinner when you get back. That phone call lasted maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes to communicate that their son's app launch was more important than their daughter's wedding. 3 minutes to show me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. 3 minutes to break something inside me that I didn't even realize could be broken. I hung up and sat in my car in the parking lot of the venue where David and I were meeting for a final tasting. I tried to process what had just happened, tried to find some way to rationalize it, tried to convince myself that maybe it really was just bad timing. But deep down, I knew this was just the most devastating example of a pattern that had defined my entire life. When David found me there 20 minutes later, tears streaming down my face, he didn't need me to explain. He just held me while I grieved, not just for the wedding guests I wouldn't have, but for the family I'd never really had. Our wedding day dawned crisp and clear in the Colorado mountains, the kind of perfect September day that makes you believe in fairy tales. David's family had taken over the logistics with military precision, making sure I felt supported and celebrated despite the glaring absence of my own parents. His Aunt Susan had even offered to walk me down the aisle when she learned my father wouldn't be there. I woke up that morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe they'd changed their minds. Maybe they were calling to say they were on their way. Maybe family meant something after all. But as I scrolled through the messages, my hope crumbled into something harder and more bitter. The messages weren't apologies or explanations. They were pictures. Pictures of Marcus at his app launch party. Pictures of my parents beaming as they networked with potential investors. Pictures of the three of them celebrating at some upscale restaurant while I prepared for the biggest day of my life 3 states away. The final message from my mother read, Marcus's launch was incredible. So many investors interested. Hope your little ceremony goes well. Love you, my little ceremony. That's what she called my wedding. My little ceremony. I turned off my phone and made a decision that would shape everything that came after. I decided that if they could treat my wedding like an afterthought, then maybe it was time I started treating their approval the same way. 29 years of begging for their attention, of shrinking myself to fit into whatever space they'd give me, of accepting scraps of affection while watching them pour everything into Marcus. That version of Scarlett was getting buried today along with any illusions I had about family loyalty. The ceremony was beautiful despite everything. David's vows made me cry, the mountain backdrop was breathtaking, and his family's joy was so genuine it almost filled the hole where my parents should have been. Almost. As I walked down the aisle in my grandmother's vintage lace dress, David's uncle officiated a ceremony that felt both deeply personal and completely foreign. This was supposed to be the moment where both our families became one, but instead, it felt like I was being adopted into David's family while mine remained stubbornly absent. The reception was when their absence hit hardest. The traditional parent dances became awkward shuffles with David's parents. The speeches section had a glaring gap where my father's toast should have been. When other guests asked where my family was, I found myself making excuses I didn't believe. They couldn't make it, I'd say, as if they'd had a flight cancellation or a family emergency, not as if they'd actively chosen something else over their daughter's wedding. But something shifted in me that night as I danced with David under string lights in the Colorado mountains. Surrounded by people who had chosen to celebrate us, who had traveled across the country to witness our love, who had spent their weekend making sure I felt cherished, I realized something profound. Family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. And my blood family had spent 29 years proving they wouldn't show up for me. The next morning I woke up as Mrs. Scarlett Chenhays. David had agreed to hyphenate another way he showed me I mattered and I felt different. Lighter somehow, but also more determined. The people who loved me had been there yesterday. The people who didn't love me enough had shown their true colors by being absent. The equation was suddenly very clear. When we got back from our honeymoon in Italy 2 weeks later, there was a card waiting on our doorstep. My mother's handwriting, a generic, "Congratulations on your wedding" card from the grocery store, with a brief note inside. "Sorry we missed it." Marcus's launch was such a success. 3 investors are already interested. Hope you had fun in Colorado. Love, Mom and Dad. Hope you had fun at my wedding. They hoped I had fun at my wedding. I threw the card in the trash and made another decision that would prove prophetic. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist except when it was convenient for them, then I'd return the favor. But I'd do it better than they ever had, and when the time came for them to need something from me, I'd make sure they remembered exactly how they'd treated me when I needed them. David found me in our kitchen that night, staring at my laptop screen where I'd been researching graduate programs and business opportunities. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "I'm thinking about success," I said, not looking away from the screen. The kind of success that can't be ignored. The fire that had been lit during my wedding burned steady and bright over the next 3 years. While Marcus's cryptocurrency app crashed and burned within 6 months, something my parents conveniently forgot to mention in their holiday newsletters, I was quietly building something that would change everything. I'd always been good with technology, but grief and determination turned that talent into something laser-focused and unstoppable. I started freelancing on weekends, taking on projects that pushed my skills in artificial intelligence and machine learning. What began as a side hustle to save for a house down payment evolved into something much bigger when I developed an algorithm that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. David supported every crazy hour, every weekend, spent coding every dinner, eaten cold, because I was deep in a breakthrough. He understood that this wasn't just about money or success. This was about proving something to myself and to a family that had never bothered to see what I was capable of. When other wives were complaining about their husbands' video game addictions, David was bringing me coffee at 2 a.m. and celebrating every small victory like it was the Nobel Prize. The breakthrough came during a particularly brutal Chicago winter. I'd been working with a client in the financial sector, and my algorithm had successfully predicted 3 major market shifts that saved them millions. Word spread quickly in that tight-knit world where success is measured in decimal points and failure means bankruptcy. My phone started ringing with offers I'd never dreamed of. By my 28th birthday, I had 15 major clients and a waiting list 6 months long. By my 29th, I was charging consultation fees that made David's engineering salary look like pocket change. The girl who used to get overlooked at family dinners was now getting courted by Wall Street firms and tech giants who wanted to license my predictive models. But here's where the story gets interesting, and where Marcus's inability to keep his mouth shut became my greatest advantage. My parents still had no idea about my success because I'd stopped calling them regularly after the wedding. Our communication had dwindled to obligatory holiday texts and the occasional awkward phone call where they'd update me on Marcus's latest ventures while asking perfunctory questions about my little job. Meanwhile, Marcus had been following my LinkedIn profile like a hawk. He'd always been jealous of my technical skills, even when my parents weren't paying attention to them. When TechCrunch featured my company as one of 30 under 30 fintech disruptors, Marcus called our parents in a panic. Not to congratulate me, but to complain that his younger sister was making him look bad in the tech space. "She's just gotten lucky with some consulting work," I later learned he'd told them. "It's not like she's building a real company like I was. Was. Past tense. Because Marcus's cryptocurrency venture had indeed crashed spectacularly, taking with it the $200,000 of our parents' money and most of their retirement savings. They'd been too embarrassed to tell anyone, including me, that their golden child had cost them their financial security. I found out about their financial troubles from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who had always been the family truth teller. She called me on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing contracts that would make me a millionaire before my 30th birthday. Your parents are too proud to tell you, Aunt Linda said, but they're in real trouble. Marcus's business failures cleaned them out, and now they're talking about selling the house. Your mother cries every night, and your father's taken a second job at 68 years old because they can't afford to retire. For just a moment, I felt that old familiar tug of sympathy. These were my parents, after all, the people who had raised me, fed me, sent me to college. Shouldn't I help them? Shouldn't family come first? But then I remembered sitting in my car outside the wedding venue, processing the fact that they'd chosen Marcus's app launch over my wedding. I remembered the generic congratulations card, the dismissive hope you had fun comment about the biggest day of my life. I remembered 29 years of being the afterthought daughter, while Marcus got every opportunity, every benefit of the doubt, every dollar they could spare. That's really sad to hear, I told Aunt Linda, and I meant it. But I also meant what I said next. I hope Marcus is helping them out since his business decisions created this mess. The next morning, I made two important decisions. First, I was going to buy myself the Porsche I'd been considering, not just because I could afford it, but because I'd earned it. Second, I was going to pay my parents a visit. Not to offer help, but to show them exactly what they'd missed by betting on the wrong child. The Porsche 911 Turbo arrived on a Tuesday, gleaming silver with black leather interior, representing more money than my parents had ever spent on anything for me. As I ran my hands over the steering wheel, I thought about all the times they'd told me to be practical and responsible while funding Marcus's increasingly risky ventures. This car was success. This car was independence. This car was proof that their opinions about my potential had been catastrophically wrong. But most importantly, this car was going to be the perfect vehicle for delivering a message I'd been 30 years in the making. I hadn't been to my childhood home in over 2 years, not since a disastrous Christmas dinner where my parents spent 3 hours discussing Marcus's failed crypto venture while asking me exactly 0 questions about my work or my marriage. The house looked smaller, somehow shabbier, with the kind of deferred maintenance that screams financial stress. The garden my mother used to pride herself on was overgrown, and my father's vintage Mustang was nowhere to be seen, probably sold to cover Marcus's debts. I pulled the Porsche into their driveway at exactly 2 p.m. on a Saturday, knowing they'd both be home. The engine's purr was different from any car I'd ever owned. Confident, powerful, expensive. I sat for a moment after turning it off, watching through the front window as my mother peered through the curtains. I could see her confusion from 50 feet away. Who was visiting them in a car that cost more than most people's annual salary? The front door opened before I'd even stepped out of the car. Both my parents emerged onto the porch, my mother in a faded housecoat and my father in clothes that had seen better days. The shock on their faces when they realized the woman stepping out of the Porsche was their daughter would have been comical if it hadn't been so satisfying. "Scarlett," my mother called out as if she needed confirmation that her own daughter was standing in her driveway. Is that your car?" I smiled the kind of smile I'd learned in corporate boardrooms, where showing weakness meant losing millions. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad." Beautiful day, isn't it? My father was circling the Porsche like a shark, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been respect. "This is a 911 Turbo," he said, running his fingers along the hood. "These start at what, $130, 000, $135, 000, I corrected, plus options." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them calculating, trying to figure out how their unsuccessful daughter could afford a car that cost more than their mortgage. My mother's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "But how? I mean your little consulting work. Little, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Mom, that little consulting work generated $2.3 million in revenue last year. I'm the CEO and sole owner of Hayes Predictive Analytics, and I have contracts with 12 Fortune 500 companies. My father stopped his inspection of the car and stared at me. 2.3 million. That's just revenue, I said casually. Profit was $1.8 million after expenses. I'm on track to do even better this year. I watched 29 years of assumptions crumble in real time. The daughter they'd written off, the child whose achievements they'd minimized, the wedding guest they couldn't be bothered to become. She was standing in their driveway having achieved more financial success than Marcus had ever dreamed of. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, and for the first time in years I heard something in her voice that might have been genuine emotion. Tell you what exactly? I asked. About my business, I tried. Remember last Christmas when I mentioned my consulting work was going well, Dad changed the subject to ask if I'd heard about Marcus's new app idea. The Christmas before that, when I said I was thinking about expanding my client base, Mom started talking about how proud she was that Marcus had gotten featured in that local business magazine. The truth was settling over them like a cold fog. Every conversation they'd redirected, every achievement they'd dismissed, every time they'd treated my success as insignificant compared to Marcus's ventures. It was all coming back to haunt them. We didn't realize. My father started, but I held up a hand. You didn't realize because you never asked. You never asked what I was working on, who my clients were, how my business was growing. You never asked because you'd already decided that Marcus was the successful one and I was just, what did you call it? Mom, getting by with my little job. My mother's face was pale now, and I could see her making connections she'd missed for years. The business magazine wants to interview me next month about women in tech, I continued. Forbes is considering me for their 30 under 30 list, and last week I got an offer to sell my company for $15 million. I turned it down because I'm worth more than that and I'm just getting started. 15 million, my father whispered. Turned it down, I repeated. Because successful people don't take the first offer, Dad. They know their worth. I let that sink in before delivering the blow I'd come here to deliver. I heard about your financial troubles, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Aunt Linda told me about the house, about Dad's second job, about the retirement fund. I'm really sorry that Marcus's business failures cost you so much. Hope flickered in my mother's eyes. The same hope I'd carried for 29 years, believing that maybe this time would be different, maybe this time I'd matter. Scarlett, we never meant to. I'm not here to fix it, I said, cutting her off as gently as I could. I'm here because I wanted you to see what you missed. I wanted you to understand that while you were betting everything on Marcus, while you were missing my wedding to support his app launch, while you were treating my achievements like consolation prizes, I was building something real. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. My father was still staring at the Porsche, probably calculating how many months of his second job it would take to afford the monthly payment. My mother was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Marcus called last week, she said finally. He wanted to borrow money for another startup idea. We had to tell him we don't have anything left to give. But you never called me, I observed. We didn't know you had. You didn't know because you never looked, I said. And you didn't call because even now, even broken desperate, you still can't imagine that the daughter you've ignored for 30 years might be the one with the resources to help. I got back in the Porsche, the leather seats embracing me like a hug. Through the open window, I looked at my parents one last time. I love you both, I said, and I meant it. But love isn't enough anymore. You had 30 years to show me I mattered, and you chose Marcus every single time. Now you know what you chose instead of me. As I drove away, I saw them in my rearview mirror, standing in their driveway, watching $135,000 worth of their daughter's success disappear around the corner. The girl who used to beg for their attention was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, while the people who underestimated you finally realize what they lost. 3 days after my visit, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Marcus's name on the caller ID made me consider letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. I hadn't spoken to my brother in over a year, not since he'd forgotten to thank me in his LinkedIn post about family support during his business struggles. Scarlett, his voice was tight, strained. "We need to talk." "Good morning to you too, Marcus," I said, sipping my coffee while watching David get ready for work. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until normal human hours? Mom and Dad told me about your visit, about your car." He spat the last word like it tasted bitter. "They said you're making millions now. I'm doing well," I said carefully, though I'm surprised they mentioned it. Usually my career doesn't come up in family conversations. "Cut the act, Scarlett. If you're really making that kind of money, then you know Mom and Dad are struggling. You know they need help. And you know it's partly my fault. I had to give him credit for the admission even if it came 3 years too late." "Go on." "Look, I screwed up, okay. The crypto thing was a disaster and I borrowed more from them than I should have. But they're our parents. They raised us, they sacrificed for us, and now they're in trouble. We can't just leave them hanging." I repeated. "Marcus, where have you been for the past 3 years while I built my business? Where were you when I got married? Where were you when I needed family support to take my company to the next level? That's different. Is it because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you only remember I exist when you need something. Just like Mom and Dad." The silence on his end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Smaller, more desperate than I'd ever heard it. "They might lose the house, Scarlett. Dad's working at a warehouse at 68 years old because of my mistakes. Mom cries every night. I've tried everything. I've applied for jobs, I've pitched new business ideas, I've even looked into bankruptcy options. But nothing's working fast enough. And what exactly are you asking me to do? Help them? You've got the money. You could pay off their debts, save the house, let them retire with dignity. It would barely dent what you're making." I walked to my home office where my latest contract was spread across my desk. A deal that would net me more in 6 months than my parents had made in the last 5 years combined. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Marcus, do you know what I was making when you got that $200,000 from Mom and Dad for your first startup? What does that matter? I was making $95,000 a year. Good money, but not spectacular. Do you know what I asked for that Christmas when you got your seed funding? Silence. I asked Dad to co-sign a small business loan for $15,000. I wanted to start freelancing on the side, maybe build something of my own." "Do you remember what he said, Scarlett? That's ancient history. He said I should focus on being grateful for my stable job instead of chasing pipe dreams. He said entrepreneurship was risky and I wasn't cut out for it. He said if I needed extra money, I should ask for a raise instead of bothering the family with business schemes." I could hear Marcus breathing on the other end, probably remembering that conversation differently than I did. "Meanwhile, you were in the garage with Dad for 3 hours every weekend planning your business strategy. Mom was introducing you to her friends as my son, the entrepreneur. I was introduced as my daughter who works in computers. Not even the courtesy of explaining what I actually did. Things were different then." "They were different because you made them different," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You positioned yourself as the golden child, the one with vision and potential. You let them treat me like the reliable daughter who didn't need attention because I was already settled. You never once suggested they should support my ideas too. I didn't know you felt. You didn't know because you never asked. Just like them. Just like always." I took a deep breath, centering myself the way David had taught me during our couples therapy sessions. Yes, we'd gone to therapy to deal with my family trauma, another expense my parents had indirectly cost me. Marcus, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. I don't hate you. I don't even hate Mom and Dad. But I'm done carrying the emotional weight of this family while being treated like a secondary character in my own life. So you're just going to let them lose everything. I'm going to let the consequences of 30 years of choices play out, I said. They chose to put all their eggs in your basket. They chose to ignore my potential while betting everything on yours. They chose to miss my wedding for your app launch. They chose to treat my success as less important than your failures. But their family, the word hung between us like a challenge. Family, the word they'd used to guilt me into acceptance for 3 decades while never applying the same standard to their own behavior. Marcus, you want to know what family means to me now? Family means David driving me to the hospital at 3 a.m. when I had food poisoning and not once complaining that it ruined his weekend. Family means his parents calling every week just to check in, not because they need something. Family means showing up consistently without conditions. That's not the same thing, it's exactly the same thing. You're asking me to bail out people who spent 30 years showing me I didn't matter as much as you did. You're asking me to save them from the consequences of investing everything in someone who lost it all. And you're asking me to do it because of biology, not because of the relationship they built with me. I could hear him getting angry now, the entitled frustration creeping into his voice. So what, you're going to punish them forever because they weren't perfect parents? I'm not punishing anyone, I said calmly. I'm just done rescuing people who never bothered to catch me when I fell. I'm done being the backup plan for a family that never made me the priority. This is unbelievable. You have the money to help and you're choosing not to because of some childhood grudge, Marcus, I said, and my voice was steel now. I have the money because I built something while you were burning through theirs. I have the money because I worked every weekend for 3 years while you were networking at launch parties. I have the money because I bet on myself when no one else would. And now you're just going to keep it all. Now I'm going to do what successful people do with their money. I'm going to invest it, grow it, and use it to build the life I want with people who actually value me. David and I are looking at houses next month. Houses that cost more than Mom and Dad's annual income. The line went quiet, except for Marcus's breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. You know what? Maybe they were right to focus on me. At least I understand family loyalty. Good luck with that loyalty, Marcus, I said, already reaching for the end call button. Let me know how far it gets you in your next business venture. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time looking at my company's financial statements. The numbers were beautiful, growing proof of everything I'd built from nothing, while my family focused elsewhere. David found me there an hour later, still staring at the papers. How did it go? He asked. He wants me to save them all, I said. He thinks I should pay off their debts because we share DNA. David sat on the edge of my desk, that careful way he had when he was about to say something important. What do you want to do? I want to keep building our life, I said without hesitation. I want to buy that house with the home office where I can expand my business. I want to start the family we've been planning. I want to keep growing something beautiful with someone who chose to love me. And your parents, I looked up at him, this man who had stood by me through everything, who had celebrated every victory and comforted every defeat, who had shown me what family could look like when it was built on choice instead of obligation. My parents will figure it out, I said, just like I did. 6 months later, my phone buzzed with a text that made me laugh out loud. It was a screenshot from Marcus, a local news article with the headline, Young Entrepreneur's Predictive Analytics Firm Valued at $50 Million. The accompanying photo showed me shaking hands with investors at the conference where I'd announced my Series A funding round. Marcus's message was simple. Saw this. Mom and Dad say congratulations. Mom and Dad say congratulations. Not "we're proud of you" or "we always knew you had it in you." Not even direct communication. Just a filtered message through my brother as if I was still too unimportant to warrant a personal phone call. The article had been picked up by several tech publications, and my LinkedIn was exploding with connection requests and interview offers. Forbes had officially named me to their 30 under 30 list, and TechCrunch was running a feature story about the quiet revolution of predictive analytics. Everyone in my industry was finally seeing what I'd been building, but my family was still communicating through intermediaries and secondhand congratulations. David found me reading the responses from colleagues and clients who were genuinely excited about my success. "The validation feels good, doesn't it?" he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "It's weird," I admitted. 3 years ago, I would have given anything for this kind of recognition from them. Now it just feels empty, like they're congratulating the wrong person's daughter. We'd bought the house, a beautiful modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a home office that was bigger than my childhood bedroom. We'd started talking seriously about kids, about building a family that would know what unconditional love looked like. I was living the life I'd dreamed of, surrounded by people who celebrated my successes genuinely and immediately. But the universe wasn't done with its lessons about karma and consequences. 2 weeks after the article ran, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a crisp, professional voice introduced herself as Janet Morrison from Cascade Legal Services. "Miss Chen Hayes, I'm calling because you're listed as an emergency contact for Robert and Linda Hayes. I'm afraid there's been a situation with their home foreclosure proceedings." My blood went cold. Despite everything, despite my anger and disappointment, these were still my parents. Are they okay? Are they hurt? They're physically fine, but they're facing eviction within 30 days. The bank has accelerated the foreclosure timeline, and they owe approximately $180,000 between the mortgage default and accumulated fees. They've asked me to contact you about a possible private loan or family assistance. After I hung up, I sat in my beautiful new kitchen looking out at the garden David and I were planning together. $180,000. It was a number that would have been impossible for me 3 years ago, challenging 2 years ago, and was now less than I'd made in the last quarter. I could fix this with a phone call. I could save my parents' house, restore their dignity, be the hero daughter who swooped in to rescue the family. The old Scarlett, the one who had spent 30 years seeking their approval, was screaming at me to do exactly that. But the new Scarlett, the one who had built a $50 million company while they focused on Marcus's failures, had a different perspective. I called Aunt Linda instead. "I heard about the foreclosure," I said without preamble. "How are they handling it?" Linda sighed. "About as well as you'd expect. Your mother keeps saying someone will figure something out, and your father is working himself into the ground trying to earn money that won't come fast enough. Marcus is useless. He's been promising to get a loan for months, but his credit is shot from his business failures. Have they mentioned me, honey? They talk about you constantly now. About your success, about how proud they are, about how they always knew you were special. It's like they've rewritten history to make themselves the supportive parents they never actually were. The revisionist history didn't surprise me. People often reimagined their relationships when the power dynamics shifted. What did surprise me was how little I cared about their retroactive pride. Linda, can I ask you something honestly? In all the years you've known my parents, did they ever really see me as more than Marcus's less important sister? The silence on her end was answer enough. "Scarlett, they love you. I know they love me. But did they respect me? Did they ever treat my dreams as seriously as his? Did they ever bet on my potential the way they bet on his?" "No," she said finally. "They didn't. And I think they're finally realizing what that cost them." That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both generous and appropriately ruthless. I called Janet Morrison back. "I'll pay the $180,000, I said, but not as a gift. I want to buy the house from my parents at fair market value, which according to Zillow is about $320,000. I'll pay off their debts and give them the remaining $140,000 to start over somewhere new. That's very generous, Janet said. Should I arrange for them to call you? No, I said. Handle it through your office. I'll have my attorney draw up the paperwork. They can accept the offer or face eviction. Those are their options. What I was offering was actually incredibly fair, maybe even generous. They'd get out of debt, have $140,000 to relocate and start fresh and avoid the credit destruction of foreclosure. What they wouldn't get was the satisfaction of being rescued by the daughter they'd spent 30 years underestimating. Marcus called me that evening, furious. You bought their house. You're forcing them to move. I offered them a fair market transaction that gets them out of debt, I corrected. They can accept it or lose the house to the bank. I'm not forcing anything. This is cold even for you. Marcus, I'm literally saving them from foreclosure and giving them $140,000 cash. How is that cold? Because you're making them lose their home. Their home that they were losing anyway because of debts they couldn't pay. Their home that they were about to lose to a bank that would give them nothing. I'm offering them a way out that preserves their dignity and gives them a fresh start. But why can't you just pay off the mortgage and let them keep living there? And there it was, the heart of the matter. Marcus still couldn't understand why I wouldn't just fix everything and ask for nothing in return. He still expected me to be the backup daughter who cleaned up messes without requiring respect or recognition. Because Marcus, I'm done being their emergency fund while never being their priority. I'm done being the solution to problems created by investing everything in you. I'm offering them a fair business transaction. They can take it or leave it. They took it. Through Janet Morrison's office with minimal direct communication, my parents accepted my offer. They used the money to buy a smaller house 2 states away, closer to my father's sister. Marcus moved with them, unable to afford his own place after his latest startup attempt failed to find investors. The house I grew up in became my investment property. David and I renovated it beautifully and rented it to a lovely young family who appreciated its charm. Sometimes I drive by and see their children playing in the yard where I used to read books alone, hoping someone would notice my achievements. My parents send Christmas cards now, always signed with love, always mentioning how proud they are of my success. Marcus posts occasionally on social media about family and loyalty, though he's notably silent about his own career struggles. They've all learned to appreciate me now that the power dynamic has shifted, now that I'm the one with resources they might someday need. But here's the thing about respect that comes only after someone proves they don't need your approval: it's hollow. It's too late. It's the emotional equivalent of closing the barn door after the horses have already run away. David and I are expecting our first child in the spring, a daughter. We've already decided she'll grow up knowing her worth isn't conditional on anyone else's recognition. She'll know that family means showing up consistently, not just when it's convenient. She'll know that love without respect is incomplete, and that sometimes the people who share your DNA are just people who happen to share your DNA. My company is on track to be worth $100 million by my 35th birthday. I've been featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine and invited to speak at conferences around the world. I've built something extraordinary from nothing, proved every doubter wrong, and created a life that feels authentic and joyful. But you know what the best part is? I don't need my parents to validate any of it anymore. Their pride now feels like an echo of someone else's accomplishment. Their approval feels like a consolation prize I no longer want to win. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not just paying off their debts and keeping the family together. They ask if I feel guilty for letting them lose their house, for moving away, for not being the bigger person who forgives and forgets. But here's what I tell them. I didn't break my family. I just stopped pretending it was whole. I didn't choose money over family. I chose self-respect over being taken for granted. I chose to build something beautiful with people who saw my worth from the beginning rather than people who only noticed my value when they needed it. The little girl who used to beg for scraps of attention grew up to be a woman who commands respect in boardrooms around the world. The daughter they overlooked became the CEO they read about in magazines. The wedding guest they couldn't be bothered to became the success story they brag about to their neighbors. That $135,000 Porsche was never about the money. It was about the moment my parents realized they'd bet on the wrong child for 30 years. It was about watching them understand that their forgotten daughter had become unforgettable and that their recognition came exactly 3 decades too late. So here's my question for all of you who've made it this far into my family revenge story. Have you ever had people in your life who only saw your worth when they needed something from you? How did you handle family members who took your loyalty for granted, and when someone finally recognizes your value, but only after you've proven you don't need their approval anymore? Is that recognition still worth anything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your stories about family karma and justice served cold. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama that proves sometimes the best revenge really is living well. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by people who were too blind to see it in the first place. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember, never let anyone convince you that you're worth less than you know you are. Sometimes the family you choose is worth so much more than the family you're born into, and sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the permission to stop seeking approval from people who were never going to give it freely. Until next time, keep building your empire and never apologize for outgrowing people who tried to keep you small.